When the Empire State Building Was New by W.M. Akers. Today, New York's Empire State Building is one of the most famous structures in the world. It stands hundreds of feet taller than the skyscrapers that surround it and is visible from far away in New Jersey and Long Island. But it isn't the tallest building in the world. In fact, since the recent completion of One World Trade Center, it isn't even the tallest building in New York City. But when the Empire State Building was constructed, it was more than just another skyscraper. It was the tallest, most remarkable building on the earth, and it stayed that way for close to 40 years. To understand what people thought about the Empire State Building when it was first constructed, we can look at original newspaper reports from the New York Times. These are called primary sources because they were written by people who witnessed history firsthand. With these New York Times reports, we can see the building through the eyes of the past and perhaps have a chance to appreciate this most famous skyscraper as though it were new. The Empire State Building was built at the site of the famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel, a lavish structure that by 1929 was no longer up to the demands of the modern world. A corporation headed by former New York Governor Alfred E. Smith proposed to build an office building there, not just any office building, but the greatest in the world. At this time, there was fierce competition to see who could build the tallest building on the earth. The nearby Chrysler Building was set to claim the title, but Smith and his company wanted to steal it from them by building something so big that it would be years before anyone could top it. There's just one little problem: the Great Depression. The stock market crashed at the end of 1929, destroying banks, emptying savings accounts, and leaving millions out of work. But the men behind the Empire State Building would not be stopped. They finished tearing down the old Waldorf Astoria by the beginning of 1930, and on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, the work on the skyscraper began. Time was an essential element, wrote Smith, to complete the greatest structural accomplishment the city had ever seen. Because height was of the utmost importance, the building was designed from the top down. At the very top would be a dirigible mooring mast. A dirigible is a kind of giant blimp built to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in the days before jets. Although now that may seem silly, at the time, dirigibles were cutting-edge technology, and the mooring mast, according to Smith, was a logical development of this day of air transportation. Moreover, the 200-foot mast would allow the building to solidly surpass the Chrysler Building in height. The mooring mast was planned to reach nearly 1,300 feet above Fifth Avenue. Below that was the building, as wide as a city block on the first floor, but narrower as it went up. The places where it got narrower are called setbacks, and they started at the sixth floor, a design the architects said would save space and assure light and air to neighbors. "We believe we have solved the problem of light and air in congested districts," said Mr. Smith. Construction began on the bottom floors even before the designs for the top floors had been finalized. Once it started, it went fast. Times reporter C.G. Poor described the process as a chase up into the sky with the steel workers going first and all the other trades following madly after them. To illustrate this, Poor produced some staggering figures. The building of the skyscraper represents an investment of $50 million, and all other figures are in proportion. More than 50,000 tons of steel, 10 million bricks, and 200,000 cubic feet of stone will be used before the frame is completed. There will be 75 miles of water mains and 2 million feet of electric light and power wiring. More than 3,000 men are daily at work. Among them are 225 carpenters, 290 bricklayers, 384 brick laborers, 328 arch laborers, 107 derrickmen. Each day, those men walked to work past long unemployment lines, which reminded them how lucky they were to have such well-paying jobs. Building the Empire State Building was a dangerous job, performed without hard hats, harnesses, or any of the safety equipment required today. Imagine walking out on a narrow steel beam 1,000 feet above the street and then having to work up there all day. On each floor, Poor tells us there was a miniature railway system to haul the steel, wood, and marble brought up from street level, and to keep the men from having to go all the way down to eat lunch. There were restaurants at various levels of the building designed for the workers. At night, when the bosses went home, the workers could relax. They would pick a specific floor of the building and throw a party, laughing and having fun, knowing that they were higher above the city than any of the richest men in town. The building was finished in just over a year. Of all the words written afterwards, perhaps the most interesting come from Mrs. Alice Lytle Hargreaves, an elderly Englishwoman who visited the tower soon after its completion. 70 years earlier, Mrs. Hargreaves had known a quiet country pastor named Lewis Carroll, who used her as the inspiration for his most famous book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Now much older than the character she inspired, Mrs. Hargreaves seemed almost as excited with her newest adventures in the Wonderland of New York. The Empire State Building, she said, was just like the tumble down the rabbit hole. Okay, and then the questions are, which of the following statements is true about the Empire State Building when it was built? A, it was the tallest building in London. B, it was the tallest building on Earth. C, it was the first building built in New York City. Or D, it was the only building made out of steel. Go back and look. 2, the passage explains a sequence of events that led to the completion of the Empire State Building. According to the passage, what happened after construction was started on the Empire State Building? A, the Great Depression started. B, the Chrysler Building was completed. C, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel was torn down. Or D, the design for the top floors was finalized. 3, working on the Empire State Building was a dangerous job. What evidence from the text best supports this conclusion? A, there were restaurants at various levels of the building designed for the workers. B, the workers were well paid. C, the workers would throw a party at night when the bosses went home. Or D, the men worked on narrow beams 1,000 feet above the street. Number 4, the Empire State Building was built during the Great Depression. Why might this have been a problem? A, it might have been more difficult to find enough workers to build the Empire State Building during the Great Depression. B, it might have been more difficult to find a location to build the Empire State Building during the Great Depression. C, it might have been more difficult to find enough money to build the Empire State Building during the Great Depression. Or D, might have been more difficult to find enough steel to build the Empire State Building during the Great Depression. Go back and look if you don't know. 5, what is this passage mainly about? A, New York City in the 30s. B, how to build skyscrapers safely. C, the tallest buildings in the world today. Or D, the construction of the Empire State Building. Here's a hint. Look at the title. 6, why did the author most likely include Mrs. Alice Lytle Hargreaves' quote about the Empire State Building in the passage? A, to prove the point that the Empire State Building was not very impressive when it was built. B, to show that the English were more impressed by the Empire State Building than Americans were. C, to provide the perspective of someone who had seen the Empire State Building when it was new. Or D, to make the reader think about Lewis Carroll's book, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Number 7, choose the best answer that completes the sentence below. Even though there are taller buildings now, the Empire State Building blank lost the ability to amaze. For example, in closing, never, or so. Number 8, what time period does most of this information in the article come from? Look back in your text. Number 9, the quote, each day those men walked to work past long unemployment lines, which reminded them how lucky they were to have such well-paying jobs. What conclusions about the Great Depression can you draw from this evidence? So what about the Great Depression can you figure out from that quote? And number 10, the Empire State Building would have been impressive if it were built at any time. What about the time period in which it was built made it even more impressive? Use information from the passage to support your answer. That means you have to go back and look.